Hello everyone, David Lang of Israeli Cool here. I'm very excited today to bring you a very special guest for another interview. He's an African-American and ex-con who turned his life around, converted to Orthodox Judaism, and now lives the life in Israel with his wife and small daughter. He's a very well-respected fitness, nutrition, and life coach, and most importantly, one hell of a nice guy. David Ben Moshe, it's an absolute privilege to have you here with me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
The pleasure is all mine, and thank you once again for being here. So, listen, your life story could actually be a movie. Unfortunately, we'll have to have a less than movie length version of your life story today. That's going to have to suffice.
Oh, yeah.
So you grew up in rural Maryland to an evangelical Christian family, well educated, you made it to college, and then somehow you ended up in prison. What happened?
So when I first went to college, I was immature. I have some problems with learning disabilities and didn't get all the correct help. And it wasn't a good fit for me at the time. In fact, I think one of the other problems in America that should be dealt with is this idea that like everyone at age 18 should go to college, pick their major, and the route for the rest of their life, as if when you're 18, you know how to do anything intelligently at all. Part of my experience at college is just part of being Black in college is people just ask you to buy drugs for no other reason than you happen to be the Black guy in the room or in the dormitory. And after enough times of people asking me that, I realized that, hey, like this is a way I can make money. Eventually ended up dropping out of college and needed a way to support myself. And when you have no college education and no job prospects, it's a pretty easy thing to get into when you're Black, because you can go to Black areas and they'll trust you and sell them to you because you're Black, and you can go to white areas and people will ask you to buy them, and it's economics, supply and demand. And then that eventually took me down a not great path until I eventually ended up in federal prison.
Wow. Now I've heard of, and probably from all those television shows I watch, people finding religion in prison, but normally the plot is that they become Muslim.
Yeah.
For some reason. But you've actually gone to prison and you've become an Orthodox Jew. How did that happen?
So there are definitely more people who find Islam, Islam does the whole pushing, trying to convince you. Also, they've got these strong, tight-knit communities, which are very attractive for people, because when you're in prison, like being able to have friends and feel safe has a lot more value than it does in the outside world. But the way I ended up finding Judaism was actually very random. So the story was I was locked down in the library. And so lockdown is basically the way it works in prison is you have different locations, like your dormitories, the dining hall, the rec yard, the library, and you're there until you're allowed to move to a different place on the compound. Compound was locked down, and I saw someone reading something in a different language. Talked to him for a little bit, asked him what it was, and he said, oh, it's Hebrew. And he was reading the Torah and also the Mefarshim. And he was explaining to me how like this is the text, and then these are the different opinions about what the text means, and how like they like disagree sometimes. And that really spoke to me, because growing up evangelical Christian, kind of the way I generally thought of religion was, this is what it says, this is what it means. You can agree with it, or for lack of a better term, go to hell.
Quite appropriate, actually. Literally. Yeah.
And the idea that you could have discussion and disagreement in one book that still is representative of a whole system of thought, and that's another way to approach a religious text, really interested me. And I just studied more and more, and it kept making more sense, and eventually decided like, hey, this is for me.
I mean, we're definitely an argumentative people, as you now know. Yeah. Not just being part of the Jewish people, but living in Israel, we love arguing with each other.
Yeah. That's
So
one
the
of my
guy,
favorite cultural things. Like, oh, you just like get in an argument with someone on the street, and then the argument ends with, oh, and then oh, come over for Shabbos sometime.
yeah, exactly, a hug, a kiss, and Shabbos meal. That's how it goes. So the guy that was in prison that you saw studying the Torah, was he actually Jewish?
Yes.
And was he the first Jew that you had encountered on a meaningful level? What was your background with Judaism like before then?
So I had some encounters, but I never really put much thought into it. At college, I'd met some friends who were Jewish, but not like Orthodox practicing. And also, when I was growing up, my mother actually has a good friend who's a Holocaust survivor, used to come speak to us at schools. Actually, one of the stories I found out later was that she had prayed for me every single day, like I was in prison. And I think that probably had some effect on how it ended up turning out.
Wow. Okay, so you've gone to prison and you get into Judaism. When was the moment? Is there a particular moment when you remember you decided, I actually want to officially be a Jew? Not just any Jew, but do it the right way. Orthodox Judaism, go the full way.
It's much less a moment, much more a process. And I like to think that even that process continues to this day, because really part of being a Jew to me means working to improve yourself and improve the world and keep learning. And that's just a process that's, I don't think it's ever going to end. And I hope it doesn't end, because there's so much to learn and we have so far to take the world to.
Absolutely. But I mean, I guess a lot of people that get interested in Judaism, they start off with Reform or conservative.
So
Obviously,
I also start
being
off with
Orthodox,
Reform, yeah.
613 mitzvot, that's pretty hard. That's a big life-changing thing. So from the beginning you wanted to sort of go the full way and say, listen, I'm going to do this correctly? Or was it a process where you went from Reform, conservative, and then Orthodox?
It was a process.
Yeah.
Kind of as you start seeing, because being an Orthodox Jew involves like much more difficulty. You have to give up many more things. I was to tell people, like, you really don't know what I've given up unless you've had a cheeseburger or like a bacon cheeseburger, because it's delicious. But
yeah, good example there.
As you start
so,
learning more and seeing how the system works together, at least for me, it started becoming a much more meaningful and much more useful. I'd use the example of just think about the regular shul service. Kind of in a Reform shul, like they have a great, beautiful service, but like it's different everywhere. Like I can go to my shul service down the street. I can go to shul, Orthodox shul in America, go to Orthodox shul in Russia, China, and I know what they're going to do. I'm understand what they're saying because they all use Hebrew. And also I can probably get connected to the community almost instantly.
Right. So you didn't just stop there, because there are Orthodox Jews in the world, but not all of them actually make Aliyah and come to Israel. But here you are today, an Orthodox Jew living in Israel. So when and how did you decide to come to Israel to live?
Yeah. So the first part of the story was I did birthright with the Reform movement shortly after I came out of prison. And at the end of that, I could just feel that like Israel was eventually going to be my home. Actually, I was talking with someone from the trip after like I moved to Israel. I was like, oh, it's like great. Like I remember you saying like one day you're going to move to Israel, and you did it. And then, but I figured that day would be like much later down the line, after like I had done a lot of career things in America and was all settled, like as like a more end of life, like retirement type age thing come over. But then I actually was presented with a unique opportunity because of systemic racism in America, where I had canceled my lease, closed down my business, and was ready to move my life down to go for study physical therapy at the University of Florida. And then at the very last minute was not able to, in a very unfair manner. So I was kind of left with, okay, so if I've already canceled my lease, closed down my business, I'm ready to move, I can move anywhere in the world, where do I want to go? And for me, the answer was Israel.
And what was it about Israel that made you want to move here?
So the first time you come to Israel, you get off the plane and you can just tell it's different.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then there is a lot of cultural things that I think are done much better for how I like to live my life in Israel. As far as I have to tell people that, in Israel, everyone's much less nice than America, but they're much friendlier.
Oh, well, that is actually one of the best explanations of Israelis I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Less nice, but way friendlier.
Yeah. Like I also explain to people like, oh, if you go down the street and like you bump into someone, have a short conversation for them, and they say, oh, you should come over for dinner sometime. In America, that's like a statement people just say. Usually you have to get to know someone like pretty well before they invite you into their home. Like an Israeli says that.
Come up for coffee.
Yeah.
But they actually mean dinner.
Yeah.
It's not a euphemism for amorous
relations. It's not like we're going to start this path of getting to know each other better and see how well it works out, and then eventually you can come. It's like, if you show up like the next day and knock on their door, they'll be like, oh, I remember you. Come in, sit down. We'll put out a plate for you. And that's just how people are.
Yeah, everyone's a Jewish mother here. But I always make the analogy, like Israelis, they'll run you off the road because, they're terrible drivers. But they'll be the first to volunteer to give you a blood donation.
Yeah. Or also like the hitchhiking culture here is just so great. Like they're like, oh, I can wave down the car if I need a ride and just trust that person to give me a ride. Like you can't do that in America nowadays.
Yeah. So, but this is still an amazing story to me. I mean, I obviously love Israel, but I come from a certain background, a very Zionist background, a Jewish background. And when I try to think of you in rural Maryland as a Christian growing up and then going to jail, and you've converted and you want to come to Israel, but I'm wondering, have you ever looked into your genealogy? Because it's actually very common amongst converts, especially those who, not all converts, and, I love all converts. I mean, I think you guys are the most amazing people alive and Jews alive, and I have nothing but admiration. But you've actually come to Israel as well. So I'm a lot of times you'll find if you look into your genealogy, there's some Jewish ancestors. Have you done that thing?
So my mother has, and on her side of the family, there is some. I think like her great-great-great-grandfather or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
a little bit.
I'm not surprised because there's a spark within you. It's not just an organic process, I believe. I think there's a spark in you that's just absolutely been lit very quickly. And, wow, I have nothing but admiration for you. And I'm very excited that you get to live your dream here in Israel. But, okay, but that's not the full story. So we have to go on. So you've come to Israel. Now, how did you meet your lovely wife?
Good. So actually, I met her online. So part of other reasons I came to Israel is being an Orthodox Jew. One, there are some certain life things that are just much, much easier in Israel, like going out to eat and finding a wife. And like one of the things I want to do here, because in the previous few years of my life, I really not focus a lot on building relationships inside. Like now I would like to really make that personal connection and find someone who I can build like a bite, like a family and like a location and be part of a greater whole. And then I met her and it just from the beginning just went so well. She was what I was looking for.
And is it true that her parents actually went to the same yeshiva, the same seminary that you were learning in?
Yeah, and had the same Tanakh teacher who had just retired this year, Rabbi Meir Schwager. So it was great. Like he knows them, I know him. It was also the Mitzvah Kiddushin at a wedding. It was just a small world.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like it was all meant to be. You see God's providence really in your life. Yeah. And when I'm listening to you and I've read all your stories, I really see it clearly. And I would like to say that you lived happily ever after, that your story is one of living happily ever after, but it hasn't really quite been like that, has it? I hate to be a bit of a Buzz Killington here, but you and your wife have encountered some pretty hard times here in Israel due to some bureaucratic whatever you want to call it, fashla. It's very important to me that you now talk about what you've been dealing with for the last couple of years.
Yeah, and still dealing with, like, we have another deadline coming up in 2 weeks where the Ministry of the Interior just won't answer. So basically, after I finished my year of studying, I applied for Aliyah. And then after applying for Aliyah, I just could not get an answer from the ministry for 9 months. Reached out to many people, had many people reach out to the ministry. The only person who managed to get any response was, I've got a few common friends with Michael Oren, and they responded to him. And basically they said, oh, the reason why it's taking so long to get a response is because we are investigating his criminal record, which I'm not quite sure what that means exactly, because I submitted all the documents to them. They had all the information, and like they take me in for more interviews. They didn't call anyone. Like maybe they had undercover Mossad agents in America looking into it or something. But then after that 9 months of waiting, they eventually denied my Aliyah application, saying that my conversion was unacceptable. And then they told us, like, oh, you have 21 days to submit an appeal. We submitted an appeal like, hey, I've got an Orthodox conversion with a OU rabbi in America. I've met all the requirements for making Aliyah. I have a Tudat Nesui from the rabbinate in Israel, which from what I gather is like the highest proof of Jewishness you can possibly get on the planet. And then we submitted that in February of 2019, and according to their policies, they legally had 30 days to answer. We still have not managed to get them to answer. They eventually managed to give me a work permit, because the entire time after I finished studying until for a year and almost a month, I had no work permit. So me and my family were here. I was just unable to work and support my family. They eventually gave me the work permit based on being in an unmarried relationship with an Israeli citizen. The logic they said behind that was, so to get status through marriage in the state of Israel, you need a civil marriage. Civil marriages do not exist in Israel. You got married in Israel with a rabbinic marriage. Therefore, we can't recognize your marriage for status, but this is proof of Jewishness, so really you should go next door and apply for Aliyah. Which was like, I've been going back and forth to that office for the previous year, and I have like, here's the letter where they said my conversion's unacceptable. I've got the Tudat Nesui. If you're saying like, this is proof I should make Aliyah, next door they're telling me I can't make Aliyah because there's something wrong with my conversion, and they won't explain why. Now you're telling me my Israeli marriage is not good in Israel. And then, so I have that, which was good for the last year and now expires in 14 days. And we don't know what's going to happen next. Kind of, they've just been opaque. Like during the 9 months I was waiting, a lot of that time was without any permit at all. They initially told me that if you apply for Aliyah, you don't need a visa to wait in the country while waiting for a response. During that time, I went abroad and was detained for 5 hours, and border control made it abundantly clear that there's no law that says that. I was in the country illegally, and that I always needed to have a visa to stay in the country. After I got that visa, I went to get it renewed. They renewed it and said, oh, while you're waiting, we'll just renew it again, come back in 3 months. I came back in 3 months. They're like, actually, we're not going to renew it because we're not going to. But like, it's okay. You can stay here without a visa. And I'm like, I know that that's not true because I've been interrogated by border control. And like, if you can show me where in the law it says that or put it into writing, that would be acceptable. But of course, they were unwilling to do that. And it's just been a very long and incredibly stressful process for me and my family as we try to build our lives here.
I'm so sorry that you're going through this. Do you think any of this is fueled by racism?
I want to say no, but it's hard to say no. Especially, so I had my Aliyah interview, which was more like an interrogation, and there were some really inappropriate, irrelevant questions that like they asked me during that. Like they ask me like, you know, are your wife's parents happy with you? How could they be happy with you? Did they even come to the wedding? Like things like that. And just the fact that like there are laws as to how they deal with someone who wants to make Aliyah. And like they're written down, we can reference them, and they've just chosen to break and not follow them every step of the way. And it's just hard to imagine that they would treat everyone like this.
Yeah. I mean, I think anyone, David, that is listening to this can hear the pain in your voice, but also understands you're quite reticent to just criticize Israel all out. And I mean, this is, since I've known you, I've seen this, that actually you're very positive about living here in Israel, despite all these hardships that you're going through. You're very reticent, very hesitant to throw Israel under the bus, so to speak. I mean, what is it about you, you think that makes you like that?
I think it's less me, it's more the Jewish people. So when it comes down to it, the state of Israel has not treated me fairly and has done some very wrong things that still haven't been rectified. But when I meet people on a day-to-day basis, or like take like just the Jewishness, when I show up to a new shul I've never been to before, the most common reaction that I get is someone walks up to me, asks me what my name is, and then offers me an Aliyah Torah, because that's what you do when a guest comes to your community who is a Jewish male, is you give him honors. And like things like that are so meaningful. Like my wife's family has been so accepting. Like my community where I live around Mota, like we're just like, I'm just treated like a member of the community. And like, that's all I really want.
I mean, that's very heartening. And as I told you before, from my point of view, people that convert to Judaism are the highest forms of Jews. Not that we should have levels necessarily, but like it's the opposite. Like I have nothing but admiration. I don't know if I could convert to Judaism. I probably couldn't, actually. I always joke to people that if I wasn't born Jewish, I'd probably be an anti-Semite. It's a bit of a joke, but you understand what I'm getting at. But be that as it may, let's tachless. How can people help you who are listening to this now and as outraged as I am about the treatment that and you said 14 days left. So tachless, how can people help you?
So raising awareness, kind of, you can add me as a friend on Facebook, reach out to me, show your support. I still have a GoFundMe up. Since we haven't had any, I haven't been promoting it a lot recently because I haven't run into any recent expenses with like getting lawyers or other things related to it. But like just, we don't know how long the process is going to happen. We have no idea what's going to happen next. I could lose my work permit in 14 days. And I kind of, last time we spoke to lawyers, like, yeah, we're still trying to avoid going to court, because once you go to court, like, yeah, sometime between 6 months and 10 years before it all gets sorted out. And we just, like, we have just a lot of uncertainty in our lives until I get my Tudat Zahut.
Well, David, I'll most certainly include links when I post this video online. And I encourage everyone to help support you and bring awareness. If you know anyone in the government or any people that might be able to help, please help David. As you can hear, you know, we need to help David. This is an absolute travesty of justice.
Yeah, I was about to say that, especially when, because people are so highly critical of Israel already. And I feel like my case is relatively easy. Like, it's not like, I understand, like, if someone converts and then wants to move to Israel, it's like worthwhile to investigate and see like if they're serious. But I have a Jewish wife who has been in the country for the last 25 years. Like, when they ask me, like, oh, you want a letter from the rabbi? Like, yeah, like, I go to shul every week, letter from the rabbi is no problem. I'm still close to my congregation back in Baltimore. I go to shul every morning in my community here. Like, if you want people to vouch for me, like, I can get those people, but just ignoring me is where, like, if they just responded or asked some people who knew me, I think we could get this sorted out very, very quickly. But they've just chosen to try to drag it out and be as unhelpful as possible.
Yeah, wow. Well, as I said, I encourage everyone watching this to please reach out to David, and I'll post links to the GoFundMe and other links. I want to change tact a bit now, David. Obviously, we see what's going on in your former homeland of the United States of America with the violent murder of George Floyd, the ensuing protests, which haven't just happened in America, but have happened all around the world, including here in Israel. How does all of this affect you personally?
So as far as how it affects me is it just brings back up a lot of the reasons why I chose to leave. Like I just posted an article that has gotten a great response where I kind of explain like one of my experiences with systemic racism and how it encouraged me to say, like, you know, that this is a great country and I love it, but if it's not gonna love me back, like I'd much rather go somewhere else.
So maybe you can talk us through a bit more of the systemic racism. I know you mentioned it a bit before, but I think it's very important because actually, I feel there's been a bit of a schism in the Jewish community, at least, you know, amongst my followers. They don't know how to respond in many cases, and you have many extremes. And on one end of the spectrum, I have people that are saying, listen, there is no systemic racism. They'll bring all sorts of statistics. And they'll say that there are more white people being arrested or brutalized by the police. All sorts of statistics. But it's very important to me, as someone that didn't grow up in the States and doesn't have that experience, to listen to someone like you that actually went through the system, went through society. And I think it's important. I want this to be a platform for you to now to tell us all about more of what you went through and why you believe there is systemic racism against Black people in the United States.
Okay. First, I think it's very important people take a moment to understand what the term systemic racism means. Because oftentimes people confuse it with institutionalized racism. And here's the difference. Institutionalized racism is like slavery or the 3/5 rule. Like if you're allowed to put people in bonds because of the color of their skin, that is institutional racism. If because of the color of your skin, you get 3/5 of a vote, that is because of the color of your skin, that is institutionalized, written in law racism. We don't have that now in America. We've made great step forward. We now have systemic racism. Systemic racism is when the greater system, which is not just the laws, it's how people are treated. It's how they're looked at walking down the street. It's the things they're encouraged to do. It's the role models they see on TV. It's the careers that they're pushed towards, put a certain group of people at a disadvantage compared to other people. For example, I'll go back to my college experience of people just asking to buy drugs from me. Like, I don't know any white people who went to college who had that experience. I know plenty of Black people who had that experience. You look at the statistics for how many African Americans end up in prison compared to how many white Americans end up in prison. 25% of Black Americans are expected to spend time in prison. 4% of white Americans are expected to spend time in prison. How do you account for that difference in percentage? And the only ways I could really think about is you have to either say, well, there's something biologically different that makes them inclined to crimes, or we have built up a system and a culture that encourages them to do those, and also certain laws are unfairly applied to them. One of my favorite examples to give to people when you think about systemic racism is a lot of the separate but equal law, which was eventually decided to be racist. The statement separate but equal is not in of itself racist. I disagree with it because I believe that integration gives us strength, but you could have a law that says separate and equal and walk into a restaurant and have a super nice, half that's for the white customers and a nice half that's for the black customers, both with air conditioning, getting equal service, and that's not racist, and that's how, if you read the law, you think it would be applied. But in practice, the way the law was applied was you go into the restaurant and the entire restaurant is air conditioned for the white customers, and there's a trough out back in the heat where the black customers go to get their service. When laws that don't have to be racist are applied in a racist way, that is an example of systemic racism. I think the biggest example in our generation is the war on drugs. Just the fact is that when they look at the studies as far as drug use, they say that it's pretty equal with both, but you're much likely to get arrested, convicted, and sent to prison of a drug law if you're African American or black than if you're white. It's just when that 18-year-old in college white student is caught with marijuana, the institution goes, oh, we can't ruin this kid's life by giving him a criminal record. On the other hand, when the black guy on the corner in his hometown is caught smoking marijuana, he is arrested, put into the system, institutionalized, and that's not fair treatment, even though the law itself does not promote racism, but the application in the society comes out in a racist way.
Thank you, David, for the explanation. I think that's a very important distinction, one that I didn't necessarily understand. And hopefully a lot of people listening to this will better understand the plight of the black people in America and not make that mistake of thinking systemic racism is institutional racism. It's more to do with entrenched racist attitudes, which lead to a certain application of the laws.
Another one of my favorite examples is people often like, oh, like the message needs to be to like young black men, just work harder and you'll be treated equal. Like, in what world does working harder to be equal make sense? Like, you should just, as hard as you work, be treated equally. I shouldn't have to work twice as hard to prove I'm equal. That doesn't make sense. And that's discouraging for a lot of black men. I know for me growing up, being constantly told, like, if you don't work twice as hard, you're not gonna go anywhere, is discouraging and does not make you want to work hard. It's like implying that there's something wrong with me when there's not. That's not how society should be working. Yeah,
no, absolutely, David. Now I want to look a bit about the Black Lives Matters movement, which is causing a lot of dissension amongst especially Jewish people because they're really tainted by anti-Semitism. You look at their platform and there's a policy document which accuses Israel of genocide, which is obviously not true. They support BDS, but it's more than that. You've got all these links between Black Lives Matters leaders and influencers or influential people within Black Lives Matters. Their ties to Farrakhan and the anti-Semitic Nation of Islam. You look at some of the protests which have turned violent. There's been anti-Semitic graffiti. Yeah, I saw a video, maybe you also saw it, of the guy talking about, going to the Diamond District, which is a euphemism for the Jews, and, causing some issues there. So how do you relate to all of this as a Jew and as a black person?
First, I want to address one of the biggest problems that I see right now in America with thought process. And that is the thought process of identifying with a certain party and then following the party line on every single issue. I think that is the root of the problem, because a lot of people who see themselves as liberal or Democrat and want to support the idea of Black Lives Matter now feel like, oh, I must now take the individual beliefs of people who have this view on every issue and agree with them, instead of looking at every individual issue as a separate issue and making up their mind on how they believe that issue should be treated. I think it is absolutely ridiculous to say the situation in Israel is an equivalent situation to the situation in America. And Black Lives Matters as a movement and a phrase has to be separated from the organization. And I'm very highly critical of the organization, especially on the issue of anti-Semitism, because I just don't see how the Palestinian plight is related. If they have separate beliefs on how the issue of the Americans, of the Israelis deal with the Palestinians and the Arabs in the country, they should have other organizations that deal with their thoughts on that and separate the issues. When I look at the situation in Israel compared to the situation with America, here is the biggest difference I think that we need to see. In America, you have the issue of full American citizens who are Black, who are systemically held back and not able to advance and want equal rights and to be treated equal. When it comes to the situation in Israel, there are at least 3 different issues when it comes to how Israel is dealing with Israeli-Arab relations. On the most micro, you have the issue of Israeli Arabs who are full citizens in the state of Israel and need to be treated better and accepted more, and that is an issue that you can draw some parallels. If you zoom out a little bit further, you have the land dispute involving, whether you want to say the West Bank or Yehuda v'Shomron, like I don't care what phrase you use, but we have a group of people who want to create their own separate sovereign nation, and there is a dispute over who has what land, and that is not the same as full citizens wanting to be treated equal. And then if you zoom out even further in the Middle East, you have the objective fact that the Jews are the oppressed minority surrounded by an Arab majority. And just because we have been in recent years, since 1948, successful and powerful, that doesn't change the fact that in the greater Middle East, the Jews are an oppressed, segregated minority. I can't get on an airplane and go visit Lebanon. Someone from Saudi Arabia can. That's not fair. There have been multiple wars where the Arab world, which greatly outnumbers the Jewish people, has tried to attack and kill us all. And therefore, our security concerns when it comes to giving up land is like a very valid issue. One of the things I like to tell people about this situation in Israel is like, remember, like in my house, our bedroom is a bomb shelter. Like, wow, when we're moving in, like one of the conversations me and my wife have is like, okay, so are we gonna have our bedroom in there or should we put our baby's bedroom in there? It's like, oh, because like you have to like think about those things. And the end result of that conversation, because my wife grew up here, and she's like, it doesn't really matter. Like, we're in Jerusalem. If the siren goes off in Jerusalem, we have like a whole minute to get to the bomb shelter. That's like forever. Like, if you live in like Sderot, you have to like consider these issues, but a minute is enough time to, go get a cup of coffee and then go in the bomb shelter. Like the fact that any child would grow up and think that like that's normal life and that's okay. And speaking of Sderot, it's one of my favorite examples of Israelis being mistreated, because I remember I went down to Sderot while I was studying. And one of the things the guy speaking at the Shiva Rat told you is like, there is a land dispute internationally, but Sderot's not on disputed land. Like internationally, there's no argument that that's part of Israel proper. Why is it that I have to run to a bomb shelter constantly when anything goes off because they just feel it's okay to shoot rockets in our city, not caring who they hit? And again, looking at those 3 issues, in the first 2, the Jews are a stronger majority, but in the biggest issue, we're a oppressed minority, and you can't take all 3 of those issues, and you can have different views on all 3 of those issues. You don't have to have one stance across the line, and we need to look at it more nuanced and attack the problems in ways that they can need to be solved. It comes back a lot to one of my favorite Albert Einstein quotes. Make everything as simple as possible, not any simpler. We've oversimplified the issue. We need to look at the nuances and the different situations and solve them as individual issues.
Wow, 100%, David. Very well said. So you would disagree with those who believe we should shut our mouths about the anti-Semitism of the Black Lives Matters movement. You think we should talk about that, but not conflate the official movement, or rather organization, with the movement and the concept of Black Lives Mattering.
I think it's important to do two things. One, you have to call out the anti-Semitism in the Black Lives Matters organization. A lot of the blowback that companies have been getting recently with the killing of George Floyd is when people don't say anything. People go, hey, this is an issue. It's not okay to be silent in the face of oppression. Just like it's not okay to not call out racism against Black Americans when you see it, it's not okay to not call out anti-Semitism when you say it. Also, we have to send a message that many of us support the idea and making the African American community better in America, and we want to help more, but we can't help more because now this separate issue, which we disagree on, has made it impossible to collaborate on the issue which we do agree on. And if we can't collaborate on the stuff we agree on, how are we going to make change in the world?
Right. Well, David, listen, I think that's a good place to leave things. I mean, we could talk, I think, for many more hours, and perhaps we'll do another interview like this.
And maybe we could meet in person when Corona ends.
You're right. Thank you so much for joining us today, and keep fighting the good fight. And hopefully anyone watching this, as I said, can help you on that fight. It's well worth it.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Yeah, you too.